So we've been looking at the aspects of going pro as a Christian, right? So we've been looking at this idea of like professional athletes, they have to work and do things like we talked about practice, and we talked about being a team player and everything like that. We've talked about these aspects and how they relate to the Christian lives to make us grow as Christians and be the best we can be. What do you guys think makes someone great?
Personality.
Personality? Like, what about their personality?
To me, if I say someone's great, I mean someone who is loyal, someone who is honest, the kind of person I see as like a friend or...
Okay, so loyal and honest. What else makes someone great?
They look good.
They look good? Okay. What else?
It's the legacy they leave behind.
Legacy they leave? So the way they act? Their character, maybe? Okay. What makes someone great? Maybe the amount of money they have?
I mean, that could make someone great to society. Like, if you have money, you're supposedly better than other people, than someone who doesn't, but...
Okay. So we have all these things that make people great. Okay, and so some of them can be like when we look at the idea of like character and like their actions and things like that. Okay, these are like things that everyone would kind of agree makes someone a good person or makes someone great. And then we have things like financial well-being and like good career and things like that maybe society sees as kind of what makes someone great. When we look at athletes and we base all the athletes together in a sport, we hand out MVP awards at the end of the year, right, for most valuable player. Does the MVP always go to the best player?
No.
No. And why do you think that is?
Because everyone has a different opinion on his first play.
Yeah, because everyone does things a little bit different, and so you can't have a straight one best player. Everyone has their own opinion. But typically, the MVP goes to one of the best players that also happens to be on one of the best teams. Do you guys ever notice that? I remember last year, Russell Westbrook won the MVP. And he did not play, the Thunder wasn't like one of the best teams. They weren't like super great. They were just like, okay. And everyone was saying, hey, can we give him the MVP since his team's not one of the best teams? And ultimately they decided they could. So why is this though, that we have this mentality that to be the MVP you have to be on one of the best teams? You know, in our society, we love stars and we love when people stand out from the crowd. Like, we like celebrities and things like that. We're kind of almost obsessed with like putting people higher than, like, oh, they're movie stars, so they're great. Oh, they're, they are a professional athlete, so they're great. We have this mentality where we have to put people on this pedestal, and we reward someone that may not actually be the best player simply because their team is good. And I think this is because subconsciously we acknowledge how hard it is to achieve a goal. Right? We understand like to totally accomplish what you want, it is challenging, right? Unless you set your goals like way lower than they should be. If you set realistic goals, they're tough to obtain. And I think we realize this, and so in the case of a sporting event, we realize how difficult it is to be one of the best teams, right? To win a bunch of games. It takes a lot more for someone to be good and help their team be good. Does that make sense? And we don't always think that just straightforward, but kind of I think it gets subconsciously, that's the path we take. Like, well, it's okay if this person's really good, but if he's a single player or she's a single player on a team and the team's horrible, is that person really that good because they can't make the team good? For example, when you talk about greatest NFL players of all time, where do you start? What position? Quarterbacks. Yeah. So like we always talk about who was the best quarterback. And people will say Peyton Manning, Tom Brady.
Terry Bradshaw.
Terry Bradshaw, okay, that's another good one. Like we have these debates about who's the best quarterback. But what about all those guys that catch the passes? Right? Being a quarterback doesn't mean a whole lot if you throw it and no one's there. You could throw the most perfect spiral. You could hit you could skin a whisker off a flea at 50 yards. But if there's no one there to catch it...
What?
Yes, skin a whisker off a flea. They do, I know. I've seen them.
Have you seen the video?
No, you could be the most pinpoint accurate with the most precision passer, but if you don't have someone on the end to catch, it's not worth anything. So what elevates the MVP quarterbacks, or these best quarterbacks to ever play the game, is their ability to make their wide receivers better by how they play, right? So you'll see all the time, if you ever watch football, they'll say, oh, they threw that receiver open, right? So a receiver's running out and he's covered, but a quarterback sees where the wide receiver should go and throws the ball there, and the wide receiver sees that and goes there. So that's an instance of a quarterback making a wide receiver better. So in this instance, it's not so much that the quarterback is great, or that the wide receiver is irrelevant. It's that the quarterback is so good that he makes his teammates better. The MVP on the team is the player that the team simply cannot be without. And this could be for either their talent, like in a basketball team, if you lose a player, you're like, oh, well, we lost Westbrook, so we lost a good shooter, a good passer, blah, blah, blah. It could be for their talent, it could be for their encouragement. You've heard of they're the heart and soul of the team, and now that they're hurt, the team's going to suffer because they don't have their encourager out there. Or how they lead by example. When you lose these type of people, it's not always just their talent, it's the person. A true MVP is the person that a team can't function without. Becoming a professional Christian, we've been talking about this kind of idea and this term, means doing the same thing in our everyday life. We need to be the person that basically God and and I know this sounds like a little pump-uppy or ego inflating, but we need to be the person that God and His kingdom basically can't function without, right? We need to be the leader of God's kingdom. Not just be oh, I'm just another bench player, or oh, I don't have to play today because I'm not that. We all need to be the MVPs of God's team. However, in life, unlike football, most of the time people who are the quarterback do all the work, but the other people get the recognition, right? So if someone came into the church and cleaned up everything and did all this nice cleaning job and everything, and then someone walked in and was standing there, and someone came in and they're like, oh my gosh, you did such a great job cleaning. Well, we don't know who actually cleaned, right? So a lot of times the people who actually do all the work don't get as much credit as they should, and that makes it difficult for us to want to do things like that, right? It makes it difficult to want to serve because it's not always self-fulfilling. Do you guys get what I'm saying? It's easy to do things when people are going to notice us, and you're like, oh, well, if I do this good thing, then everyone will be like, oh man, Brian, he is so great. Man, look at him. He carried that old lady's grocery bag for her. He's such a nice guy. But the things that aren't always easy to do are the things when you don't get noticed, right? The true times where you're to be an MVP, those are the times when we really need to step up and do what we should do, even though it's hard. We fall into this trap of not doing things, right? We do the things that get us noticed, and we fall into this trap of not doing the things behind the scene because we figure no one will ever know. And when we look at Scripture, we don't see Jesus setting this kind of example, right? There's no disputing the fact that Jesus not only taught His disciples how to live, He also showed His disciples how to live. right? The way that Christ lived his life was an example for us. We talk about that all the time, about how we need to live a Christ-like life. Well, it's because what he did was a perfect example for what we should do. So when we look at the way that Christ acted, we need to mimic that. So today we're going to look at something that Jesus did in his ministry. We're going to look at Matthew 20, starting at verse 22, 20. It says, "Then the mother of Zebedee's sons came to Jesus with her sons and kneeled down, asking a favor of him. 'What is it you want?' he asked. She said, 'Grant that one of these two sons of mine may sit at your right and the other on your left in your kingdom.' 'You don't know what you are asking,' Jesus said to them. 'Can you drink the cup I am going to drink?' 'We can,' they answered. Jesus said to them, 'You will indeed drink from my cup, but to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared by my Father.' When the 10 heard about this, they were indignant with the brothers. Jesus called them together and said, 'You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials excuse authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whosoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many.'" I'm sure you guys have all heard an adult or someone in charge say the phrase, "Do as I say and not as I do." In fact, you've probably heard me say that phrase at some point. I feel like I say that from time to time, and it's not always the best thing to say, right? I'm no, better or anything than you guys are, and so why should I be sitting there going, "Hey, I tell you to do this, but do what I'm saying and not what I'm doing"? An example that it put in here, which I thought was kind of funny, I was like, that is a terrible example, but it kind of made me chuckle. It said when you have like a gym teacher that like is really overweight and out of shape and is telling you how to live a healthy life, and everything, and you just think like, why in the world are you telling me what to do about living a healthy life? So this idea of do as I say and not as I do, this illustrates the difference between us as humans and Jesus. Because Jesus lived out everything that he told us to do. Not only could he talk the talk, which he did through his teaching, but he also walked the walk in his ministry. Right? So every time that he would say something, he would back it up with his actions. So when he sits here and says, the Son of Man came to be, not to be served, but to serve, he didn't just say that and then let his disciples do the work and create the illusion that he's actually doing the work. But Jesus himself actually got his hands dirty and did the work. For many, there are so many reasons that Jesus could exalt himself over humans, right? We could start listing it. He's perfect, he's sinless, blah, blah, blah. There's so many reasons that Jesus could put himself on a pedestal, but he never did. He went to the sick, he went to the needy, he went to the homeless, he went to the sinners. He treated the crooked tax collectors and the lepers the same that he did the religious leaders of the day. He loved them all equally, he served them all equally, and he died for them all equally. What are we going to do to become an MVP for Christ? How can we go about doing this? How often do we step out of our way, out of our comfort zone, to serve others? Yeah, we'll sometimes go out of our way, or we'll go out of our comfort zone, but most of the time it's to grow ourselves, right? Or to make something, we'll say, oh, I'm getting out of my comfort zone so I can expand the way that I reach people, or I'm going to get out of my comfort zone so that I can grow better in my faith in this certain way. But how many times do we step out of our path, step out of our comfort zone for someone else's benefit? Now, some of you guys in here probably have the spiritual gift of service. If you guys remember back when we talked about spiritual gifts, that was a big one, right? Is this idea to serve and not really want the attention, right? To just truly serve and not care if anyone ever knows that you were serving. And so this kind of stuff is easy for you. And I get that. That's awesome. But I would say for most of us, myself included, man, this is one of the toughest things for me. I hate doing stuff that I should do when no one's watching. Like, okay, you guys still live in your parents' house for the most part. I think I don't have it. Yeah. But when you live in your parents' house, right, they kind of have rules that you have to kind of clean your room, keep it nice, you have chores and everything. Okay, when you guys get adulted, yes, sure, it is now. When you become an adult, you lose this like ability, or you lose this parental figure that tells you what you should do. Like, I don't have anyone that tells me that I need to clean my room.
Haley?
No, I clean for her. I don't have anyone that tells me to clean my room, so it makes it really hard for me to clean my room because I don't want to do it. It's not fun.
Yes, it is.
Right? No, it's horrible. Okay. Then you can come to my house and clean my room for me. We don't like to do things, right? And so what I'm saying with that is, if you're someone who has that spiritual gift of service and you're sitting here going, what are you talking about? I love to serve. Okay, I'm talking to the 99% of people who hate to serve. Okay? You have a spiritual gift if you like to serve. How often do we serve those in need? How often do we have a friendly conversation with someone who is new, someone who's an outsider, someone who feels alone? How often do we do that? We've withdrawn ourselves into this little Christian culture, right? We hide ourselves from the outside world within the walls of this church. The only time that the church speaks out is typically to cast judgment on people who aren't in church. It is absolutely time for that to end. And honestly, I want you guys to be the first to do it. You want to talk about stepping out of your comfort zone, stepping out of your path? That's being a trendsetter. That's doing things that God calls you to do even though other people aren't doing it. We live in a very sympathetic culture right now. Every time and everywhere you turn, you see people talking about equality. You see people talking about bullying. You see people talking about, don't say these things, they hurt others, right? We live in a culture that is very sympathetic, okay? Not pathetic, but sympathetic, okay? We live in a culture that is sympathetic. We are in a perfect environment to try to allow this same sympathetic aspect of Christianity to show through. Right? We always talk about how Christians are called to love and how Christians are called to be accepting and everything like that, but yet Christians are viewed as the people who don't do that. It's time to let that show through. We are in the perfect environment to allow that to happen. Yeah, you might get a little bit of judgment from other Christians who are like, oh, you shouldn't accept them because they're a sinner. No, you need to do what God tells you to do regardless of what other people say. If we truly become servants, like real servants, not like, oh yeah, I once picked up a plate when no one was looking and threw it away, I'm a servant. We can become real servants of God. We will start to turn heads of those who follow Christ and those who don't follow Christ. Jesus didn't call us to build big churches, to have cool rooms, to ignore the rest of the world while we rock out to the latest Christian band that we all tend to do. We tend to lock ourselves in our building and be like, hey, we're having a church function. because we're cool and we're the church. That's not what Jesus wanted us to do. Yeah, those things are fun. I like going to those things as much as the next church boy. But what?
The way you said that,
I like going to those things as much as the next person who goes to church. How's that? I like to do those things. Those things are fun, right? They're things that are geared towards us. They're things that are pointed towards us. The problem is, there are things that are geared towards us. There are things that are pointed towards us. We need everything pointing away from us. God called us to go serve and to love, not to focus on ourselves. To be a professional Christian, we need to focus on what it truly takes to be an MVP. And that is to serve God with everything we have. To take everything that God has given us and focus it on other people. It's time for us to get off our own pedestals, put Jesus first, and then put others second, with ourselves in third. You guys have probably all heard this. You guys have heard the joy, right? Jesus, others, yourself. Yeah, my parents would always say that to me, like whenever I was being selfish or I was being greedy, my mom would always go, Brian, remember, it's Jesus, others, yourself. And I'm like I was so mad. I hated that when she would say that. But it's so true. It's so true. Typically, we tend to make it yourself, Jesus, others. Which is like, you Joe. That doesn't even make sense. See? That's why you shouldn't do it. No, we need to. Why, Joe? We need to make sure that we are putting Jesus first, because that's the most important thing in our life. Put others second, because reaching other people and ministering to other people should be the second most important thing in our life. And then we need to put ourselves way down the list. Yeah, it's okay because we do need to care about ourselves a little bit. Man, we do not need to worry about what is best for us, what is going to happen to us. That is for God to worry about. We just need to do what God has called us to do, and that is to serve others. What we're going to do now is we are going to, we so often think that worship is this like thing that is confined to singing songs or focusing our attention to God. So, we've been doing some prayer worship. We've been doing some symbolic worship when we did the hand washings and things like that. Honestly, if you want to know what a good symbolic way of servanthood is, it was Jesus when he washed the disciples' feet. I didn't really want to wash your feet, no offense. I might do that sometime.
No, that's you don't have to. I'm ticklish on my feet.
Here's this whole lesson about being a servant. I don't want to do that.
Yeah, I know. Okay. I figured some of you guys wouldn't want me to wash your feet either.
I don't like that.
So instead of doing that, I decided to do something else that's even more out of the box. When we look at this idea of worship is simply, look at me, worship is simply focusing ourselves and our attention on God. And I thought, what better way to focus our attention on God than to seek out what He wants from us?